Before I get into the review, I have a bone to pick with one upcoming Street Fighter movie. They recently revealed the full cast list for the new adaptation, a lot of them being wrestlers, which is whatever, and there's Jason Lawnmower as Blanca. The big problem is Sagat. Where is he? How can you go for such a blatant Street Fighter 2 adaptation and not include the penultimate boss? Out of the four kings, you'll omit the best one? Balrog and Vega are here, why no fun-loving Sagat? Sagat is a pivotal character in early Street Fighter. He's the final boss of the original game. If I were doing a Street Fighter movie, I'd do a pseudo-adaptation of the original 1987 Street Fighter and the Zero series, Sagat being the primary antagonist, inevitably being usurped by M. Bison in the sequel. But hey, we got Joe. You know Joe, from the original Street Fighter. The really bad, no good, really terrible Street Fighter. We got Joe and no Sagat. Joe and no Sagat. No Sagat. But Joe. What the fuck?! Regardless of the quality of a film that's not even out yet, all this hubbub got me thinking about the game that piqued my interest in the Street Fighter franchise, that being the vanilla Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter 4 came out in a time when the fighting game genre was in a lull, with few games of any real prominence releasing in Western markets. Many stuck as niche Japanese exclusives, Capcom having turned their back on the series that led to the boom in the genre in the first place. I've mentioned the brutal commercial failure of Street Fighter 3 in a couple videos now. The fact that many felt the 2D sprite-based graphics were outdated versus the slick new polygonal look many fighting games were striving to achieve in the late 90s. The irony being that Street Fighter 3 has aged like a fine wine compared to its competitors. Regardless of quality, the financial loss Capcom suffered killed the franchise for 9 years. Thus began the fighting game Dark Age. Obviously Street Fighter 3 wasn't the sole reason for the slow decline in the industry, that was the decline in arcades. Street Fighter's future was bleak until one man, Yoshinori Ono, fought tooth and nail with Capcom's higher-ups for a chance to revitalize the franchise. Ono was a sound and character designer turned game producer. He was also a big Street Fighter fan. Ono led a one-man campaign to ignite the fire that would spark a new Street Fighter, appealing to journalists and fans to plead with Capcom for a new Street Fighter. The then CEO was allegedly only interested in American audiences, as they were the largest source of income. So, when Ono proved that the West were indeed interested in a brand new Street Fighter, he got his green light. It also helped that there was a successful re-release of Street Fighter 2 on the Xbox Live Arcade, applauded for its online multiplayer, which had yet to be done as well for a fighting game as it had been here. Online multiplayer was the future, so it was key in ensuring Street Fighter could persist into the 21st century. Although, it wasn't smooth sailing just yet. The development of Street Fighter 4, in typical Street Fighter fashion, was a rocky road paved with corporate doubt and incompetence. Dimps were enlisted to co-develop the game, Dimps being proficient in making fighting games, alongside being reliable developers often hired to make games for larger companies. They were indispensable. Dimps were the glue that stuck all the pieces together. Street Fighter 4 finally burst into arcades in July of 2008, just over 9 years after Street Fighter 3 Third Strike inadvertently ended the saga in 1999. Street Fighter 4 was the first fighting game in a long while to release into actual arcades and make a noticeable impact with gamers. Hundreds of people gathered to play the game. Street Fighter 4 ran on a Taito Type X2 arcade board within a Taito Vulix cabinet, using the MT Framework engine, which Capcom had begun using in 2006 with Dead Rising and Lost Planet for the Xbox 360. The cabinets even featured their own online multiplayer capabilities, with Taito X2's LAN, which allowed players to fight each other on separate arcade cabinets. Home console ports followed 7 months later in February of 2009 for the Xbox 360, and the port I'm most familiar with, the PlayStation 3.
And the battle begins! Fight!
Street Fighter 4 isn't a sequel to 3 based on a couple of factors. In order to regain the audience they may have lost with how technically complex 3's mechanics were, the gameplay was made to be more in line with Street Fighter 2's later editions. And 4 isn't a follow-up to 3's plot. It isn't a sequel, rather an interquel, being set between Street Fighter 2 and 3, meaning Gil and the Secret Society have been cast out and replaced with the more recognisable M. Bison and Shadaloo, although 4 does shake things up by not making Bison and Shadaloo the arch-villains, with newcomer Seth and the sinister organisation SIN taking centre stage as the evil organisers of the latest World Warrior tournament. Seth's ultimate motivation being to steal Ryu's supreme fighting abilities and his ability to harness the mystical Satsui no Hado. Hold on, that's just the plot of Street Fighter 2. Bison organised the tournament in the second game to lure Ryu and steal his abilities. I suppose it makes sense seeing as though Seth is literally Bison. Well, technically some replacement clone body for Bison that gained sentience and rebelled. And I'm gonna end that tangent right there. The lengths Bison goes to extend and prolong his life is insane. The whole thing with Cammy and the other dolls being replacement bodies for him are just weird. Even the journey that Seth goes on is mental, with his consciousness eventually being trapped within a female body in Street Fighter 5, which was also supposed to be yet another backup body for Bison. Does Bison have something he wants to share with the class? Street Fighter 4 includes many familiar faces from 2. All those returning in the 2008 arcade roster were purely comprised of the original 8 characters and bosses from the CPS 1 editions of Street Fighter 2. None from the new Challengers Zero series or Street Fighter 3, although they were accompanied by a selection of new fighters. These guys are a mixed bag. We've got Abel, a French martial artist, his origins a mystery even to himself. Then there's Crimson Viper, Sea Viper for short. Viper is an undercover agent for the CIA, having infiltrated SIN. She's likely the best of the vanilla game's roster of new characters. I like her design and her playstyle. She's obviously popular enough as she's the next character slated to appear in Street Fighter 6's next batch of DLC. To perfectly contrast a good character, we get what is undoubtedly my least favourite Street Fighter character of all time, Rufus. An American trucker, Rufus is a walking stereotype. I'm not offended by it or anything, I'm not an American, but man, I shouldn't have to see this. No one should. His design sucks, his story sucks, he sucks to fight, he sucks to play as. It's all the more upsetting when you learn that Rufus was originally intended to be a martial artist named King Cobra, but at the last minute they decided to scrap the character and went with Rufus. They even kept King Cobra's voice actor to play him. Imagine the disappointment going from this to this. If that had happened to me, I'd have probably murdered every last developer working on Street Fighter 4. Last we have a Mexican luchador and aspiring chef, El Fuerte. Fuerte has become rather popular amongst fans. I personally don't care much for him. He's the fastest character in the game, which I'd usually be all for. I just think he's too goofy, which is a trend with most of the new characters introduced in 4 and 5, as Yoshinori Ono was just a silly little guy. The new characters are pretty weak and lame. Sea Viper is great, she belongs in the pantheon of good Street Fighter characters, but the rest? I want to like Abel, but he's a bit meh. His design is alright. I like that it's revealed that he's another failed standby body for Bison. Abel even sharing a character model similar to Seth's, but he simply isn't enjoyable to play as, and I wish he was. I needn't explain why Rufus is the worst thing to happen to fighting games. I think he should be cast into the deepest, darkest bowels of hell. As for El Fuerte, I forget he exists a majority of the time. There's also 2 secret characters. The obvious one being Akuma, who is the most powerful fighter in the game, and Gouken, who was a character that had been hinted at in Zero games, finally making his playable debut here. Gouken's pretty cool, definitely one of the better new additions. As for returning combatants, I think the over-reliance on 2 is a slight shame, but I can understand why they did it. I have never cared for Guile, Blanca, or Zangief, and it bothers me that they've appeared in every Street Fighter since 4. Fortunately, the home releases of the game introduced many other characters from Street Fighter 2, such as the new challengers and iconic members of the Street Fighter Zero series such as Sakura, Dan, Gen, and Rose. These new additions making vanilla Street Fighter 4's roster one of the best the series ever had. Not even the lame new characters can let it down at this point. As I said earlier, 4's gameplay was made to be a modernized version of 2's, intended to be simple enough that it would gain the attention of people who had never even touched a Street Fighter in their lives. Although this approach backfired as professional tournament players claimed it was the most complex Street Fighter ever, with one-frame link combos being an absolute must in being able to play the game competitively, despite being incredibly challenging to execute. Street Fighter 4 isn't the first 3D game in the franchise, but it is the first to nail the gameplay, Dimps having made a similar fighting game called the Rumblefish, which was an early adopter of the 2.5D style, which essentially retains the feel of a 2D fighter, but conveyed via 3D graphics. A couple flourishes were added. The Ultra and Revenge meters provided players with the opportunity to make a comeback if they're getting hammered by their opponent, the Revenge meter filling up as you take damage. Once the meter is high enough, you'll enter a simple button combo and you'll pull off a fancy attack that can even work as a grandiose finisher if you time it well enough. Street Fighter 4 was criticised when it was ported to consoles, as the game requires an arcade stick to play properly, which consoles obviously didn't ship with. This means it'll set you back a fair swedge of cash, a good fight stick at the time being upwards of £70 to £100. I personally use this somewhat newish hoary fight stick, which was made for the PS4, 5 and PC, yet it surprisingly works on the PlayStation 3. I guess the hardware isn't too different when it comes to the controllers, or they didn't feel like advertising it for a console that's not even manufactured anymore. Either way, this is an awesome stick and I'd recommend it to anybody interested in getting one. Graphically, the game is borderline perfect. I remember watching my dad play it back when it came out and I thought it just had the best graphics ever. I vividly recall being blown away by Seth for whatever reason. The music is largely forgettable. There's a handful of tracks that are somewhat memorable, but most I can't even attempt to hum. The best track is easily the character select theme, which is sadly exclusive to the vanilla release of Street Fighter 4, being absent from later releases. The track is an instrumental of the opening cinematic song, Indestructible by Exile, the English version of the song featuring Flo Rida. I'm not confident something like this could happen today, not because it's offensive, but because the song is terrible. But it's also incredibly endearing because it's so dorky. You can tell they thought they had something awesome on their hands, as it plays over a fantastically rendered cutscene showing off all the characters, rendered in a style reminiscent of Japanese calligraphy. Fight Your Rival is a cool feature, similar to how the Zero series and Second Impact handled their final stages instead of having an overall final boss that every character faces at the end of a ladder, although some of the characters' motivations for fighting during the rival fights is rather dumb.
I don't want to fight you, Rose.
Neither do I.
I don't want to fight you, Flash.
I wouldn't want to fight me neither.
And every ladder does end with a Seth fight, and some of the reasons for fighting him are equally thoughtless. Characters no longer have their own dedicated stages like in past games. The stages themselves are solid, and unlike the music, I can actually remember quite a few of them. It is really impressive how they managed to retain the charm of the classic 2D Street Fighters with these fancy new 3D graphics. Everyone makes the transition between dimensions especially well. My personal favourite characters to play as have got to be Ryu, Sagat, Akuma, Chun-Li, Bison, Rose, and Cammy. I have given Street Fighter 4 a slightly hard time, but this is possibly my second favourite fighting game of all time. I mean, I suck at it. I find Street Fighter 4 to be really difficult, especially the vanilla version. But I love this game to the point where I now own every version they made. From Super, to Arcade Edition, to Ultra. Do I need to own all of these? No, I have a problem. Sometimes I'll go into a shop and I'll see a game I already own and I have to buy it again. I have to have it again. I have to have it. Street Fighter 4 single-handedly rejuvenated the fighting game genre. The aftershock being felt to this day with an endless supply of fighting games, new and old, keeping interest in the genre alive and well. Just look at how big EVO has become. Although the Street Fighter brand stumbled with the bare bones and broken launch of Street Fighter 5, it's safe to say that the continuing success of Street Fighter 6 ensures that the series isn't going anywhere.